Is letter from America for May 19. Today's topic is Mnangagwa's Dhiziri PaChinhoyi government is now a toxic liability for Zimbabwe. In a space of 2 weeks, Mnangagwa's ZANU-PF regime has proved beyond reasonable doubt that it's time to step down and bring a new government for Zimbabwe. This Dhiziri PaChinhoyi administration, as some people like to call it, has been plunged into a series of decisions and actions that boggle people's minds, leaving people to wonder about the mental sanity of this regime. The pattern of acts of insanity by the ZANU-PF follow a common and familiar path: use of violence against opposition opponents, use of ZANU militia thugs supported by police and army units to harass, torture, kidnap, kill, and rape civilians, and use of mindless propaganda. And this now stretches to mindless, arbitrary social engineering madness and executive directives to mismanage the economy. But fortunately, all of these actions have backfired. In a 2-week insanity marathon of indecisiveness, this boo regime has reversed a ban on Zupco bus monopoly. Previously, they saw by their ancestors that Zupco would be the only monopoly in bus transportation. But they have now backtracked after flip-flowing on dollarization and de-dollarization. One day, Mnangagwa, whom some people call Tongombeya Scarfman, issued an executive order strengthening and redirecting the use of the bedridden Zimbabwean dollar in most transactions. Now, Scarfman's finance minister has quietly reverted to the status quo, where practically every Zimbabwean uses the US dollar. In another act of sheer desperation, Mnangagwa regime reversed the ban on lending money by the banks a few days after ordering the banks not to lend money. This order generated widespread criticism that this boo regime does not know the business of banking. The business of banking is to lend money. In what a former ZANU-PF official, who is now in exile, called Mahumbwe or kindergarten politics. A letter from the high-sounding Office of the Presidential Envoy and Ambassador at Large to the Americas and Europe, and addressed to Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development, demonstrated the lack of basic grammar when it confused the word conversation for conservation. Part of the letter, which went viral on the social media and caused volcanic eruptions of laughter, read in part, "Following your conversation with our Chief Secretary." Did they mean following your conversation with our Chief Secretary? This insanity marathon turned out to be contagious. One day, a top ZANU-PF official demanded in a public videotape that the people of Zimbabwe have a right to know where the missing $15 billion is, 15 US billion dollars. What happened to it? He screamed while thumping the table. That was Chris Mnangagwa. But a few days later, after the same, Chris Mnangagwa, looking calmer, more composed, said he was quoted out of context. Not to be outdone, another ZANU-PF official, Chinotimba of course, who is more well known for being a circus comedian than an MP, claimed Mnangagwa was out to remove him from his position as MP. And predictably, the next day, he too claimed he was quoted out of context. Even the yellow color has been weaponized by ZANU-PF. Attempts to discredit through coercive and other measures the newly formed CCC failed dismally. Now, like a Spanish bull to a red rag, ZANU-PF has been raging mad at the sight of the color yellow. Wearing yellow in Zimbabwe today can lead to, depending on the circumstances, all kinds of harassment and violence. An ice cream vendor was denied entry to the trade fair in Bulawayo just because he was wearing yellow uniform. Even when the Speaker of Parliament turned into a fashionista judge, when he illegally barred CCC MPs from wearing yellow attire. In a case of misdirected priorities, Mnangagwa encouraged students at a technical college to learn how to make bullets and jet fighters. At the same time, his finance minister encourages Zimbabweans to import food in face of the impending drought in the country. Mnangagwa then promised to deal with inflation and skyrocketing consumer prices. But he has done nothing about it. And Zimbabweans remember that the same Mnangagwa once told a rally that he was once asked what he was going to do about corruption, and he said, "Nah, ndakati regera ndinyarare. I will just keep quiet." A Mnangagwa copycat, by way of amusement, Linda Mazarira claimed she had turned down an offer of $3 million US from the US Embassy if she would go around speaking against ZANU-PF. This claim went viral on the social media. Many people followed Hopewell Chingono's tweet that Linda must take a bath first. Wonder why? Maybe her lies stink to high heavens. Another act of sheer lunacy and contradictions. Last year, ZANU-PF forced the High Court to declare that Nelson Chamisa was not the legitimate president of MDC-T and subsequently MDC Alliance because the rules of succession had not been followed according to the MDC constitution. Now, the same ZANU-PF is piling pressure on Saibeth Msengezi, who has filed a lawsuit in the same High Court that challenges the way Mnangagwa succeeded the ousted Robert Mugabe. As a matter of fact, Msengezi is now in jail on frivolous charges that he misrepresented himself when he became a member of ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF's marathon of insanity has been particularly focused on CCC. CCC members went through sheer hell on earth during the campaigning for the March 26 and May 7 by-elections. Having been stripped bare of their head office, their original name, and funding, CCC was expected to lose spectacularly and perhaps disband. That was ZANU-PF's hope. The logic was simply, how else can you make an effective campaign when you have no offices, no money, and are constantly harassed by the militia thugs and police? On the other hand, ZANU-PF and MDC alliance under Monzora were lavishing themselves on the $500 million under the Political Parties Financing Act that they had splashed on themselves under this political parties funding formula. But everything backfired on ZANU-PF and Monzora. They both suffered a humiliating defeat and are now haunted by the specter of an overwhelming CCC victory in 2023 elections. This projection of CCC victory is not mere propaganda from the pro-CCC forces. ZANU-PF itself is begrudgingly admitting that they face a humiliating defeat in 2023. Just recently, ZANU-PF Party Vice President Kembo Mohadi said CCC gives ZANU-PF unending headaches. Many other top officials now admit CCC is a formidable political force in the tradition of the original MDC under Morgan Tsvangirai. Yet ZANU-PF is so used to its Machiavellian politics that they are not willing to reform. This attitude is understandable because ZANU-PF is like a jilted lover who used to beat and harass his wife and now wants to come back to her. But the wife will not accept him because the physical and emotional injury he inflicted on her is too much for her to accept him back. And now this man says if she will not accept him back, no one will have her. He then embarks on endless terroristic aggression against her and her newly found lover. This is exactly ZANU-PF's position. If Zimbabweans do not re-elect ZANU-PF, no other party will have that power to govern the country, according to ZANU-PF. This is clearly in reference to CCC and its dynamic and youthful leader, Advocate Nelson Chamisa. Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF's erratic behavior in ruling the country is a continuation of a legacy left behind by Mugabe. Some anti-Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF critics appear, unfortunately, to be sanitizing Mugabe. It's one thing to say Mugabe akange ari nani, Mugabe was better, or Smith akange ari nani, or Smith was better. These expressions do not mean or should not mean Mugabe was good or Smith was good for the Zimbabweans. They simply mean and should mean that Mugabe was worse than Smith, Mnangagwa is worse than Mugabe. When the late Oliver Mutukudzi sang the song Zvinu Izvi Zvinowawa, dai zvaiwawirira ndaiti zvimwe zvichanaka. Things are bad. If only they were spicy, I would think they would be eventually tasty. This complete and unequivocal rejection of Mugabe, ZANU-PF, and Mnangagwa by the people of Zimbabwe is captured also in the music of the country's leading musician Thomas Mapfumo. In his song Asingadi Hade, Thomas Mapfumo simply states, "Wanu waneta hawachadi kuteerera mambo, hapana anomanikidzwa kuteera mambo." People are tired of ZANU-PF and Mnangagwa. They no longer want to support ZANU-PF and Mnangagwa, and they have the right, the absolute right, to refuse to support ZANU-PF and Mnangagwa. They cannot be forced. No one should force the people of Zimbabwe to support ZANU-PF and Mnangagwa. And in the witch doctor's mixed bag of insanity, ZANU-PF, now sliding irreversibly on a downhill trajectory, is frantically trying every conceivable act of treachery to stay in power. If only ZANU-PF and Mnangagwa could listen to Thomas Mapfumo's song, "Wanu hawachadi kuteera mambo, hapana anomanikidzwa kuteera mambo." If only they could listen to that. But ZANU-PF is blind and deaf to that reality. Word on the street is that top ZANU-PF officials are consulting and bribing witch doctors as well as the so-called Madzibaba and the prophets in the profile hope that ZANU-PF will survive another year, another election. The year 2022, this year, started off very, very badly for ZANU-PF, especially with the shocking news that ZANU-PF is now losing support from the army and the police. Police in particular want to maintain their professional reputation. They are afraid that a future government, after ZANU-PF predictably loses at the elections, will hold the police and the army to account for their lack of professionalism as well as violating the Police Act. Furthermore, civil lawsuits will be filed against them, the police, for torturing, killing, and kidnapping civilians. But the dirty laundry list of bad governance stretches way back into the late Mugabe era. That's why I said earlier, Mugabe must not be sanitized. Zimbabweans determined as far back as the 1990s that Mugabe and ZANU-PF were not fit, were no longer fit to rule the country. The protests against Mugabe's government ushered in the new 2000 millennium serious political challenges for ZANU-PF, ranging from the rejection of a referendum and the ushering in of the MDC, which almost overthrew ZANU-PF in the 2000 elections. This lack of confidence in and complete rejection of Mugabe and ZANU-PF has continued since the late 1990s. There was never any moment when Zimbabweans showed any change of opinion in favor of supporting ZANU-PF. It has been a political downhill slope for Mugabe and ZANU-PF and now Mnangagwa. This explains more than ever why ZANU-PF adopted the Machiavellian strategy to stay in power. This Machiavellian strategy is based on Italian political scientist Niccolo di Bernardo dei Machiavelli, who in 1532 wrote that for the ruler to strengthen his position, it is better to be feared than loved. He argued that being popular does not guarantee that one will rule for as long as one likes, because people can always take away their love for the ruler and overthrow him. But he argued if the ruler uses brute military force, people will always fear him. Mugabe learned this lesson twice. First, ZANU-PF lost all the seats to Joshua Nkomo's ZAPU in the elections that led to Zimbabwe's independence in 1980. For the next 2 years, Mugabe and his inner cabinet, which included Firebrand, the late Innocent Nkala, and the then Security Minister Mnangagwa, plotted to instill fear among the people of Matabeleland. In 1983, the notorious 5th Brigade was unleashed on Matabeleland. More than 20,000 innocent civilians were massacred in cold blood. The 5th Brigade commander, the late Perence Shiri, boasted one day, and speaking in Shona in Matabeleland, said, "Kachisango kangu aka keMatabeleland, kandakapiwa na wa Mugabe kuti ndimboshereketa. Ndiri kushereketa. Matabeleland is my playground. It was given to me by Mugabe." But this plan to impose support through fear in Matabeleland backfired. In the 1985 general elections, 2 years into the Gugura-Wundi atrocities, ZAPU again won all the 15 seats in Matabeleland. Mugabe's project to force the people of Matabeleland to support him floundered. He then sought to unify ZANU and ZAPU into what he called One People's Liberation Party. The Unity Accord that was signed in 1987 was not really a unity of two equals. ZAPU was completely absorbed by ZANU. Earlier in 1979, both ZANU and ZAPU had agreed to unite and fight the elections of 1980 as one party to be called Patriotic Front. But ZANU reneged on this at the last minute, preferred to campaign on its own as a separate political party. That was before independence. The second lesson for Mugabe was the defeat in a referendum for the proposed constitution in 2000. Mugabe also nearly lost the general election of the same year. There can be no mistaking the fact that Mugabe, ZANU-PF, and now Mnangagwa have historically and continuously been rejected by Zimbabweans for two basic reasons. In the past 42 years, ZANU-PF has been in power. It has nothing to show for what it has done for Zimbabweans. At every election, ZANU-PF has not been able to highlight any major achievement in improving the lives of Zimbabweans. In a remarkable contrast, in the 4 years MDC led by Trangirai was in government of national unity, it reversed the economic slide where inflation was more than 1 million%. And you needed millions of Zimbabwean dollars to buy just one loaf of bread. MDCT Finance Minister Tendai Biti's policy was, we eat what we kill. He introduced austere measures that included the adoption of multi-currencies. The international financial institutions started feeling more willing to consider helping the country, something they had absolutely refused to extend to Mugabe before and after the GNU. At the end of 4 years of the GNU, Zimbabweans could feel confident that the economy was now working in their favor. Unfortunately, that confidence was short-lived when Mugabe hastily ended the GNU in 2013. When Mnangagwa was appointed president after Mugabe had been overthrown in a coup in 2017, Zimbabweans celebrated in the hope that Mnangagwa had reformed and was going to try to do better than Mugabe. But those celebrations and that optimism were short-lived. Soon Mnangagwa began to show his true colors, and in no time he has proved worse than Mugabe. But as this year 2022 showed, or has showed so far, it will not be an easy road for Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF. He is now facing a post-Mugabe Zimbabwe whose citizens are fast becoming proletarianized. What do I mean by proletarianized? This means Zimbabweans today, unlike in the past, are not only increasingly realizing that they are being impoverished by a small clique of very greedy ZANU-PF officials whose self-proclaimed mission in life is unlimited corruption without any regard for the human socio-economic development interest of the Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans are also realizing very quickly that they vastly outnumber these filthy rich ZANU-PF officials. Zimbabweans are inspired by the words of Makomborero Haruziwishe, who said, "We are many, they are few. We are the ones we have been waiting for." As a result, the youthful Zimbabweans are mobilizing a defiance campaign and openly confronting ZANU-PF militia thugs and even the police. They are now chanting the South African slogans and clarion call, "Ilizwe Ngelethu." And the Triple C is now playing Ishe Komborerai Africa at its rallies. All of these are signs of a proletarianized Zimbabwe and signs of things to come as the nation prepares for the 2023 elections. The Mnangagwa regime will increasingly act erratically, irrationally, and illogically. Somebody quoted the biblical Jesus as saying, "When things start going unusually wrong and out of place, it is a sign that the end is near." In 2007, or 15 years ago, ZANU-PF hoped to find diesel from the rocks in PaChinhoyi. But there was no diesel. They had been fooled by a young woman with only grade education. Now, ZANU-PF hopes to win next year's elections, essentially by rigging and with the police and army support. But as things stand now, and reading of the tea leaves does not point to a positive year for Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF. To summarize, ZANU-PF increasingly sees no Dhiziri PaChinhoyi in 2007 and painfully no victory in 2023 elections.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe.